Every Friday morning, without fail, I'd hear it. A loud crunch, then silence, then tires screeching into the sunrise. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but after the third incident, I realized something truly absurd was happening. Someone was at war with my mailbox. Not just any someone. Our HOA president, a woman who treats community rules like sacred law and rusty bolts like a personal offense. She didn't just want control, she wanted domination, one petty violation at a time. But hey, I'm not the type to back down, and when engineers fight back, we get creative. Explosively creative. Let me tell you how this quiet suburb turned into a battlefield over one innocent box on a stick. Comment where you're watching from, because if this story found you, Doreen might just be on the run from more than neighborhood gossip. 2 years ago, I moved to Willowbrook Heights, this quiet suburban neighborhood outside Phoenix. I'm David Martinez, 35 years old, work as an electronics engineer for a tech company downtown. After my divorce, I just wanted somewhere peaceful to rebuild my life. The house was perfect, small, cozy, with a simple black mailbox that matched every other house on the street. Or so I thought. The neighborhood seemed like paradise. Kids playing in the streets, neighbors waving hello, perfectly manicured lawns stretching as far as the eye could see. I figured I'd finally found my slice of the American dream. Man, was I wrong. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks after I moved in. I got this official-looking letter in my mailbox, which should have been ironic considering what was about to happen to that poor mailbox. The letter was from the Homeowners Association, inviting me to a mandatory monthly meeting. Mandatory. I should have known right there that this wasn't going to be your typical friendly neighborhood gathering, but I'm a reasonable guy, so I showed up at the community center that Tuesday evening, expecting maybe some discussion about trash pickup schedules or holiday decorations. Instead, I walked into what felt like a courtroom. About 20 residents sat in folding chairs, facing a long table where 5 people in business attire sat like judges. At the center was this woman, maybe late 30s, with short blonde hair that looked like she'd cut it herself with gardening shears. She wore a rumpled navy blazer that had seen better days and kept shuffling through a stack of papers like she was preparing to prosecute war crimes. This was Doreen Cartwright, and she was about to become the bane of my existence. "Welcome, Mr. Martinez," she said without looking up, my name dripping from her lips like she'd tasted something sour. "I trust you've had time to review our community guidelines." I hadn't. I didn't even know there were community guidelines. But before I could answer, she continued, "We've received several complaints about your property." Several complaints? I'd been there 3 weeks. The only thing I'd done was plant some flowers and put up a small American flag next to my mailbox. "Your mailbox," she said, finally looking at me with these cold, gray eyes, "does not meet our aesthetic standards." I looked around the room, confused. Every house on my street had the exact same black mailbox from the same hardware store. Mine was identical to everyone else's. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice friendly, "but I don't understand what the problem is. My mailbox looks exactly like everyone else's." Doreen's mouth twisted into what might have been a smile if smiles could be filled with contempt. "The regulation clearly states that all mailboxes must maintain a pristine appearance. Yours has rust spots." Rust spots? I bought the thing brand new 3 weeks ago. But I looked closer at the photos she slid across the table, and sure enough, there were these tiny brown spots that could have been rust, or could have been dirt, or could have been anything. "These photos were taken yesterday," she continued. "You have 7 days to replace your mailbox with one that meets community standards, or you'll face a fine of $200, plus daily penalties of $50 until the issue is resolved." $200 for rust spots that probably came from the sprinklers? I felt my face getting hot, but I kept my cool. "What exactly constitutes community standards?" I asked. She handed me a thick binder, and I mean thick, like phone book thick, filled with single-spaced text in tiny font. Everything you need to know is in there. Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 7 specifically addresses mailbox maintenance requirements. I flipped through the binder trying to find section 12, but it was like reading the tax code written by someone having a fever dream. The other residents sat in dead silence, some looking sympathetic, others studying their shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. I realized this wasn't a meeting, it was an ambush. "Look," I said, closing the binder, "I just want to be a good neighbor. If there's really a problem with my mailbox, I'll take care of it, but I honestly don't see what you're seeing in these photos." Doreen leaned back in her chair, and for a moment I thought we'd reached some kind of understanding. Then she spoke again, and I knew I was wrong. Mr. Martinez, this community has maintained its property values and aesthetic standards for over 15 years. We don't make exceptions, and we don't negotiate. 7 days. The way she said it, with such finality, such smugness, made something twist in my stomach, but I nodded, picked up the binder, and left without another word. That night I stood in my driveway with a flashlight, examining my mailbox like it was evidence in a murder case. It was just a mailbox. Black metal, regulation size, completely normal in every way. Those rust spots were barely visible even with the flashlight. I could have sanded them off in 5 minutes, but something about the whole situation felt wrong. This wasn't about rust spots. This was about power, about showing the new guy who was in charge. But I'm not a confrontational person, so I decided to give Doreen the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just really passionate about neighborhood standards. Maybe she'd had bad experiences with previous residents. Maybe I was overthinking the whole thing. I went to bed that night thinking I'd just buy a new mailbox and move on with my life. It would cost me maybe $40 and save me the headache of dealing with neighborhood politics. Simple solution to a simple problem, right? At 6 a.m. the next morning, I learned that Doreen doesn't make empty threats. I woke up to what sounded like a car accident. Loud crash, scraping metal, car alarm blaring. I threw on clothes and ran outside, expecting to see 2 cars tangled up. Instead, I found my mailbox scattered across my lawn in 50 pieces. The post was bent 90 degrees, the box completely crushed, chunks of black metal everywhere. But here's the thing. There were fresh tire tracks in the wet grass leading right to where my mailbox used to be. And stuck to one piece of metal was a chip of blue paint. Bright blue, metallic, the exact color of Doreen Cartwright's Honda Civic. I stood there in my pajamas, looking at the destruction, and felt pure, undiluted rage. I gathered the pieces, took photos of everything, and walked straight to Doreen's house. 7:15 a.m., but I didn't care. I rang her doorbell 3 times before she answered in a pink bathrobe, looking freshly woken. But her Honda Civic was dripping wet in the driveway like someone had just washed it. At 7:15 in the morning, "Mr. Martinez," she said, not even trying to hide her annoyance. "It's rather early for social calls, don't you think?" I held up a piece of my destroyed mailbox. "Someone destroyed my mailbox last night. Drove right through my front yard and smashed it to pieces." She looked at the metal in my hand like it was roadkill. "How unfortunate. Vandalism is such a problem these days. You should probably call the police." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, so completely unbothered, told me everything I needed to know. "Funny thing is," I continued, "they left blue paint on the metal, same color as your car." Doreen's eyes narrowed, and for just a moment I saw something that looked like panic flicker across her face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by righteous indignation. "Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Martinez? Because that would be a very serious accusation." I looked past her at the Honda Civic, water still beading on its freshly washed surface. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just stating facts. Blue paint, fresh tire tracks, your car looking like it just went through a car wash." She stepped closer, and I could smell coffee mixed with whiskey on her breath. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 8 years. 8 years of maintaining standards, dealing with people who think rules don't apply to them. Your mailbox was a violation, and now it's gone. Maybe you should consider that a natural consequence." Natural consequence. She actually said that with a straight face. I stood there for a moment, processing what she'd just implied. Then I smiled, which seemed to unnerve her more than anger would have. "Well then," I said, "I guess I'll just have to get a new mailbox, a better one this time." Something in my tone must have worried her because she took a step back. "Just make sure it meets community standards," she said, then closed the door in my face. I walked home feeling like I'd declared war. If that's what Doreen wanted, that's what she'd get. I spent the morning cleaning debris and researching mailboxes online. If she thought my $40 mailbox was a problem, wait until she saw what $200 could buy. I ordered heavy-duty steel with a reinforced post, the kind that could survive a tornado. That afternoon, my neighbor Bob Jenkins came over to help install the new mailbox. Bob was 45, retired, with the look of a guy who'd seen enough nonsense to recognize it instantly. While we worked, he said, "Doreen pulled this same crap with the Hendersons before you moved in. They lived in my house and moved out after constant harassment over various violations. She drove them crazy. Every week, something new. They finally gave up and moved. This wasn't about standards, it was about control. Finding someone weak enough to push around." Well, I wasn't submitting, and I wasn't leaving. That evening, I installed a security camera in my front window, angled to capture my mailbox and the street. High definition with night vision and motion detection. If Doreen wanted to play demolition derby with my property, I'd have evidence this time. The new mailbox looked fantastic. Solid steel, gleaming black, mounted on a post that could stop a small truck. I thought a stronger mailbox would solve the problem. Boy, was I wrong. The security camera was the smartest investment I ever made. 3 days after installing my fortress-grade mailbox, I was sitting in my living room watching the evening news when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. The camera app showed a blue Honda Civic creeping down my street with its headlights off. It was 11:15 at night, and the car was moving slowly, deliberately, like a shark circling its prey. I switched to live view and watched as the Honda pulled into my driveway. The driver sat there for almost a full minute, engine running, just staring at my house. Then the headlights came on, bright and blinding in the darkness, and the car accelerated straight into my mailbox. The sound was incredible. Metal against metal, sparks flying, the Honda's bumper crumpling as it met my reinforced steel post. But my beautiful new mailbox didn't budge. It just sat there, completely intact, while Doreen's car absorbed all the impact. I watched through the camera as she backed up, surveyed the damage to her front end, and then, I kid you not, she tried again. This time she hit it even harder, really putting her whole weight behind it. The Honda's headlight exploded, the bumper fell completely off, and steam started pouring from under the hood. But my mailbox? Still standing proud without even a scratch. Doreen sat there for another minute, probably in shock, before finally reversing out of my driveway and limping away into the night. The whole thing was captured in crystal clear, high-definition video, complete with her license plate, her face clearly visible in the driver's seat, and audio of her cursing like a sailor when she realized she'd just totaled her car on a mailbox. I saved the footage to 3 different locations and spent the rest of the night watching it over and over again. It was better than any action movie I'd ever seen. The next morning, I called the police and filed a report. Officer Johnson, a tired-looking guy in his 50s, came out to take my statement and view the evidence. I showed him the video on my laptop, pointing out the license plate, the clear view of Doreen's face, and the obvious premeditation in her approach. "Well," he said after watching it twice, "that's definitely criminal property damage, open and shut case." I felt a surge of relief. Finally, justice was going to be served. But then Officer Johnson's radio crackled, and he spent 5 minutes talking to his dispatcher about some domestic dispute across town. When he turned back to me, his whole demeanor had changed. "Look, Mr. Martinez," he said, closing his notepad, "this appears to be a neighbor dispute that got out of hand. These things happen all the time in HOA communities. Have you tried talking to your neighbor about this?" I stared at him in disbelief. "Talking to her? She just tried to destroy my mailbox with her car. Twice." Officer Johnson shrugged. "Property damage under $500 is usually handled as a civil matter. You might want to consider mediation through your HOA." Mediation through my HOA? The HOA that Doreen ran like her personal dictatorship? I could feel my blood pressure rising. What about the video evidence? She clearly intended to destroy my property. He looked uncomfortable now, like he just wanted to escape. Without witnesses or additional evidence of intent, it's difficult to prove this wasn't just an accident. Maybe she was backing out of her driveway and lost control of the vehicle. Lost control? The video showed her sitting in my driveway for a full minute before accelerating into my mailbox. But Officer Johnson was already walking back to his patrol car, mumbling something about filing a report and letting the insurance company sort it out. I stood there in my driveway, holding a USB drive with rock-solid evidence of a crime, watching a police officer drive away because dealing with neighborhood disputes was apparently too much paperwork. That afternoon, I found a notice stuck to my front door. It was from the HOA, written on official letterhead and signed by Doreen Cartwright herself. "Dear Mr. Martinez," it began, "we have received multiple complaints regarding the installation of surveillance equipment on your property without proper approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Additionally, your mailbox appears to exceed the approved dimensions outlined in Section 12, Subsection 4, Paragraph 9 of the Community Guidelines." The notice went on to inform me that I was being fined $350 for unauthorized modifications and failure to maintain approved aesthetic standards. I had 7 days to remove the camera and replace the mailbox or face additional daily penalties of $75. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. She'd just tried to destroy my mailbox with her car, failed spectacularly, and was now fining me for having a mailbox that was too strong for her to break. But here's where things got interesting. I had had enough of playing defense. If Doreen wanted to escalate this into full-scale warfare, I was ready to fight back. I spent that evening designing and printing flyers on my home computer. They were simple, black and white, with a large heading that read, "Missing, Common Sense," followed by a description. Last seen in the vicinity of Doreen Cartwright. HOA President. If found, please return immediately. Reward offered for safe return. I'd included a small photo of Doreen that I'd found on the HOA website, along with her contact information and a list of her recent accomplishments, including attempted vehicle assault on innocent mailbox and advanced degree in neighborhood harassment. At the bottom I added, "Have you seen this behavior in your neighborhood?" Followed by Doreen's home phone number. I spent the next morning distributing these flyers throughout the neighborhood. I put them on car windshields, tucked them into mailboxes, and even posted a few on the community bulletin board at the grocery store. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Neighbors who had been too intimidated to speak up before started reaching out to me with their own horror stories about Doreen's reign of terror. Mrs. Patterson from 3 houses down told me that Doreen had fined her $200 for planting roses that were too red for the approved color palette. The Johnsons had been cited for having a doormat with a seasonal design instead of a solid color. Even Bob, my neighbor who'd helped install my mailbox, admitted that he'd received dozens of violations over the years for everything from parking his work truck in his own driveway to having grass that was allegedly half an inch too tall. By noon, my phone was ringing off the hook with people wanting to share their Doreen stories. By evening, I'd collected enough material to write a book about HOA abuse. But the most interesting call came from Susan Parker, who lived 2 streets over and served on the HOA board with Doreen. "David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk. There are things about Doreen you need to know, things that go way beyond harassment." That's when Bob said something that changed everything. Sometimes you gotta fight fire with fire. Susan Parker turned out to be exactly the ally I needed. She was in her early 40s, worked in marketing for a tech company, and had been dealing with Doreen's tyranny for 3 years as a reluctant board member. We met at a coffee shop in the next town over, well away from any potential Doreen surveillance. "She's not just a control freak," Susan told me, stirring her latte nervously. "She's been using her position to settle personal vendettas against anyone who challenges her authority." She pulled out a folder thick with documentation. The Hendersons weren't the first family she drove out. Before them it was the Mitchells, and before them the Garcias. All 3 families left because of constant harassment that mysteriously started after they questioned something at a board meeting. Susan showed me copies of violation notices, fine assessments, and complaint letters that painted a clear pattern of abuse. The worst part is, she's been skimming money from the HOA budget to pay for improvements to her own property. The evidence was damning. Invoices for community landscaping that matched work done exclusively on Doreen's front yard. Receipts for emergency repairs that corresponded to new siding on her house. Even a bill for security equipment that turned out to be a home security system installed at her address. "We're talking about thousands of dollars," Susan said. But every time someone tries to bring it up at a meeting, she shuts them down with procedural nonsense and parliamentary tricks. That evening, Bob came over to help me process everything Susan had shared. We sat in my garage, looking at the evidence spread across my workbench, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about my mailbox anymore. This was about taking down a neighborhood dictator who'd been terrorizing good people for years. "So, what's the plan?" Bob asked, cracking open a beer. "Because whatever it is, I'm in." Bob, it turned out, had some very interesting skills. Before retirement, he'd worked in special effects for low-budget movies, the kind where they couldn't afford digital explosions, so they had to create real fire and smoke with practical effects. "Nothing dangerous," he assured me when he saw my expression, "but if you want to give someone a real good scare, I know how to make it look like the world's ending without actually hurting anybody." That's when the idea hit me. Doreen's next attack was inevitable. She'd already proven that bigger, stronger mailboxes just made her more determined. But what if I gave her exactly what she wanted? What if I made it easy for her to destroy my mailbox, but turned the tables in the process? What if, I said slowly, my mailbox fought back? Bob's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm I hadn't seen since my nephew discovered video games. "You mean like a booby trap?" I nodded. Nothing that would hurt her, but something that would scare the hell out of her and give us undeniable evidence of what she's been doing. We spent the next 3 hours sketching out possibilities, and by the end of the night, we had a plan that was both brilliant and completely insane. The concept was elegantly simple. I'd replace my fortress mailbox with something that looked normal and vulnerable, but hidden underneath would be a pressure-activated system that Bob could build using his special effects expertise. When Doreen's car hit the mailbox, it would trigger a series of events designed to create maximum shock and awe, while providing irrefutable evidence of her crime. "Picture this," Bob said, drawing diagrams on a napkin. She hits the mailbox, the pressure plate activates, and suddenly there's a huge flame shooting up from under her car, bright flashing lights and an alarm loud enough to wake the dead. The flame would come from a small camping gas canister with a remote igniter, completely safe but dramatic as hell. The lights would be high-intensity LEDs programmed to flash, "Gotcha!" in bright red letters. The alarm would be a marine air horn, the kind they use on boats, guaranteed to bring every neighbor running. "And one more thing," Bob said with a mischievous grin. "What if we put some tire spikes in her escape route? Nothing permanent, just enough to slow her down and give us more footage." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that legal?" Bob shrugged. "Agricultural stores sell them for keeping vehicles out of sensitive areas. As long as they're on your property and there's a legitimate reason." He trailed off, but we both knew what he meant. One good scare with some flat tires wouldn't hurt anyone, but it would definitely send a message. The camera setup would be even better this time. Instead of just recording from my window, I'd install multiple hidden cameras with night vision and motion detection. One in the mailbox post itself, one in the tree across the street, and one in Bob's front window for a different angle. Everything would automatically upload to cloud storage in real time, so even if Doreen somehow destroyed the cameras, the evidence would already be preserved. But we needed to make sure she'd take the bait. My current mailbox was obviously too strong for her to tackle again, especially after the damage to her car. I needed to send a signal that I was giving up, that she'd won. So I crafted the most humble apologetic letter I could stomach writing. "Dear Mrs. Cartwright," it began, "I want to apologize for the misunderstanding regarding my mailbox. After reflection, I realized that community standards are more important than personal preferences." The letter went on to explain that I would be replacing my current mailbox with a more appropriate model that fully complied with all HOA guidelines. I mentioned that the new mailbox would be installed on Friday evening and expressed my hope that we could put this unfortunate incident behind us. I even included a gift card to a local restaurant as a peace offering. It was the kind of groveling surrender that would appeal to Doreen's ego and convince her that one final blow would cement her victory. The response came faster than I expected. On Wednesday morning, I found my garden completely destroyed. Every flower had been pulled up by the roots, my small vegetable patch was trampled flat, and someone had spray-painted "Learn Your Place" across my front steps in bright red letters. Attached to my front door was a note written in Dory's distinctive handwriting. "This is what happens to people who don't respect authority. Friday's installation better be perfect or you'll face consequences you can't imagine." Consequences I couldn't imagine? Oh, Doreen had no idea what was coming. Bob and I spent the next 2 days perfecting our system, testing every component to make sure it would work flawlessly when the moment came. The pressure plate was sensitive enough to trigger from the weight of a small dog, but sturdy enough to withstand normal weather. The gas system had multiple safety cutoffs to prevent any actual danger. The flame would shoot up exactly 3 feet for exactly 10 seconds before automatically shutting off. We had 1 week to build the perfect trap. Doreen had no idea what was coming. The week leading up to Friday felt like preparing for the most important performance of my life. Bob and I worked on our mailbox defense system every evening after dark, testing and retesting each component until we could trigger the entire sequence with our eyes closed. The beauty of our plan was its simplicity. When Doreen's car hit the mailbox, a hidden pressure plate would complete an electrical circuit that would simultaneously ignite our flame system, activate the lights and alarm. We ran dozens of tests using bags of sand to simulate car impact. The timing had to be perfect. Too fast and she might escape before the full effect hit. Too slow and she might realize what was happening and drive away. After countless trials, we got it down to exactly 2.5 seconds from impact to full activation. Long enough for her to commit fully to the attack, short enough to catch her completely off guard. Bob's flame system was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. Using a small camping gas canister hidden in a fake rock, He rigged an ignition system that would shoot a controlled burst of fire about 3 feet into the air, directly under where the front of an attacking car would be. "It's the same setup we used in low-budget movies," he explained proudly. "Looks terrifying, completely harmless, burns clean for about 10 seconds before automatically shutting off. The gas was odorless and colorless, so there would be no advance warning." The psychological impact was just as important as the physical effects. The LED lights spelled out, "Gotcha!" in letters 2 feet tall, bright enough to be seen from space. The Marine air horn would blast for 30 seconds straight at a volume guaranteed to wake every neighbor within 3 blocks. Combined with the flame, it would create such a spectacle that half the neighborhood would come running with their phones already recording. Thursday afternoon brought unexpected complications. My doorbell rang, and it was Doreen, wearing her official HOA blazer and carrying a clipboard, flanked by 2 other board members. "Mr. Martinez," she said with a shark-like smile, "we're here for the pre-installation inspection." Pre-installation inspection? That wasn't mentioned in any guidelines I'd read. I don't understand what you need to inspect. The new mailbox isn't even here yet. Doreen's smile widened. "Community guidelines require all modifications to be approved before installation. We need to ensure your new mailbox meets specifications." She tried to peer around me into the garage where Bob and I had been working, but I shifted to block her view. "The mailbox is being delivered tomorrow morning," I lied smoothly. "Once it arrives, you're welcome to inspect it." Truth was, our decoy mailbox was hidden in Bob's garage, and our entire defense system was stored in waterproof containers in my backyard. Doreen's expression darkened, but she couldn't argue with delivery schedules. "Very well," she said, making a note. "But understand that if your installation doesn't meet every single guideline, you'll face immediate penalties." After they left, Bob and I spent the evening doing final preparations. We installed hidden cameras at all 3 locations, each focused on different angles to ensure complete coverage. The camera in the mailbox post was particularly clever. Disguised as a standard reflector, it would capture Doreen's face at the moment of impact with perfect clarity. Friday morning arrived, gray and overcast, perfect conditions for our little show. I made a big production of setting up the new mailbox, working slowly and obviously so anyone watching would see exactly what I was doing. The mailbox itself was deliberately flimsy, thin aluminum that would crumple at the slightest impact, painted glossy black to look new and expensive. But hidden underneath was our entire defense system. The pressure plate was invisible beneath a thin layer of dirt and grass. The gas canister was concealed inside our fake rock, positioned for maximum visual impact. The LED light system was built into the mailbox post itself, the letters invisible until activated. As a final touch, Bob helped me place a small strip of tire spikes about 8 feet behind the mailbox, right where someone would back up if they hit it and tried to escape quickly. We covered them with just enough dirt to be invisible, but not enough to stop them from working. "Insurance policy," Bob called it, in case she tries to run before we get good footage. As I worked, I noticed curtains twitching in windows up and down the street. Word had clearly spread about our ongoing war, and the neighbors were paying attention. Good. The more witnesses we had, the better our case would be. I also noticed Doreen's Honda Civic parked in her driveway, freshly repaired from her last encounter with my previous mailbox. She'd even had it repainted, though I could still see slight color variations where the bodywork had been done. That afternoon, I hand-delivered my surrender letter to Doreen's house. She answered the door quickly, like she'd been waiting by the window. "Mr. Martinez," she said, reading the letter with obvious satisfaction, "I'm pleased to see you finally come to your senses." She actually smiled as she read about my peace offering and my promise to comply with all community standards. "This is how these situations should be resolved," she continued, "with respect for authority and proper procedures." I nodded humbly, playing my part perfectly. "I just want to be a good neighbor. I hope we can put all this unpleasantness behind us." Doreen's smile became predatory. "Oh, I'm sure we can," she said, "once you've learned your place in this community." The way she said "learned your place" sent chills down my spine, but I maintained my humble facade. "Well, the new mailbox is installed and ready for inspection whenever convenient." "I'll be sure to take a very close look at it," she said, and something in her tone told me that her inspection would involve more than just a visual examination. Very close indeed. As I walked home, I felt familiar anticipation in my stomach. Everything was in place, every component tested and ready. All we had to do now was wait. Friday night, 11 p.m. I knew she'd come. I just didn't know it would be this epic. I was sitting in my living room at 11:30 that Friday night, laptop open, watching the feeds from all 3 cameras simultaneously. The neighborhood was dead quiet, except for the occasional dog barking in the distance and the hum of air conditioners fighting the desert heat. Bob was positioned at his front window with a perfect view of my mailbox and his phone ready to record backup footage. We'd tested our communication system earlier. A simple text message from me would let him know when the show was about to start. The first sign of movement came at 11:37, a dark shape moving slowly down the street with no headlights, barely visible except for the faint glow from streetlights reflecting off metal. The Honda Civic crept along like a predator stalking prey, and I could feel my heart rate spike as I watched Doreen's car approach my house. She drove past once, slowly, obviously checking to see if anyone was awake or watching. The street remained dark and quiet. On the second pass, she turned into my driveway and sat there with the engine running. Through the camera hidden in the mailbox post, I could see her face clearly, determined, angry, with something that looked almost like hatred in her expression. She wasn't just planning to knock over my mailbox. She was planning to obliterate it, to make sure I understood exactly who had the power in this neighborhood. She sat there for what felt like forever, but was probably only about 2 minutes, gathering her courage or maybe just savoring the moment. Then she put the car in reverse and backed all the way to the street. My stomach dropped as I realized what she was doing. She wasn't going to just bump into the mailbox, she was going to get a running start. This wasn't vandalism, it was attempted vehicular destruction. I quickly texted Bob, "She's making a run for it, get ready." His response came back immediately. "Camera rolling, this is gonna be good." Doreen's headlights suddenly blazed to life, bright and blinding in the darkness. The Honda's engine revved once, twice, and then she floored it. The car shot forward like a missile, aiming straight for my innocent-looking aluminum mailbox. I watched through multiple camera angles as 3,500 pounds of Honda Civic accelerated toward our carefully prepared trap, and for just a moment, I wondered if we'd gone too far. Then I remembered the destroyed flowers, the harassment, the families she'd driven away, and I felt nothing but anticipation. Impact came at exactly 11:41 p.m. The Honda's front bumper struck the mailbox dead center, crumpling the thin aluminum instantly and triggering our hidden pressure plate. For a split second, nothing happened. Then all hell broke loose. The first thing that activated was the gas system, and suddenly a massive column of bright orange flame erupted from directly underneath Doreen's car, shooting 3 feet into the air and lighting up the entire street like a movie explosion. The flame was beautiful and terrifying, casting dancing shadows across the houses and making the Honda look like it was sitting on top of a volcano. Half a second later, the LED lights blazed to life, spelling out "Gotcha" in letters so bright they could probably be seen from the International Space Station. The message flashed red, then white, then red again, strobing like the world's angriest Christmas display. But the real showstopper was the Marine air horn, which began blasting at a volume that made me grateful I was inside my house. The sound was incredible, like standing next to a freight train's whistle, and it went on and on. The effect on Doreen herself was even better than we'd hoped. The moment the flame erupted, she started screaming. Not just yelling, but full-throated, horror movie screaming like she thought the car was about to explode. She threw the car into reverse and hit the gas, but after backing up about 6 feet, there were 2 sharp pops as her rear tires hit our hidden spikes. The Honda lurched to one side as the back tires deflated, but Doreen was so panicked she kept trying to reverse anyway, now dragging 2 flat tires and making this horrible scraping sound against the asphalt. When the car finally stopped, Doreen practically kicked the door open and stumbled out, still screaming about fire and explosions. Her hair was standing up like she'd been electrocuted, and she kept pointing at the mailbox area, shouting, "It's gonna blow! It's gonna blow!" to absolutely no one. The fire had already shut off automatically, but she kept running around in circles like the car might spontaneously combust at any moment. That's when the neighbors started appearing. The air horn was still blasting every 10 seconds, and between that and Doreen's screaming, every house on the street had lights coming on. People started emerging from their front doors, most of them carrying phones and pointing them at the spectacle. Bob was at his window, getting everything on video, but so were the Johnsons, the Pattersons, Mrs. Chen from across the street, and at least 6 other neighbors I could see. Doreen was running around her car in circles, still shouting about explosions and fires, when she suddenly realized she had an audience. The look on her face, caught between terror, rage, and humiliation, was absolutely priceless. She tried to wipe soot off her windshield with her bare hands, which only made the mess worse and got black residue all over her palms. The Marine air horn chose that exact moment to blast again, making her jump about 3 feet in the air. "Someone call 911, she screamed at the gathering crowd. "This maniac tried to blow up my car." Mrs. Patterson, bless her heart, actually had her phone out and was already dialing. But instead of calling for emergency services, she was live streaming the whole thing on social media. I could see her phone screen from my window, and the viewer count was already climbing rapidly. That's when Doreen made the mistake that sealed her fate. Instead of trying to explain what had happened or maybe just leaving the scene, she marched up to my front door and started pounding on it with her fists, leaving black handprints all over the white wood. "David Martinez," she shrieked. "You get out here right now! You could have killed me!" I waited exactly 30 seconds before opening the door, just long enough for her to work herself into a complete frenzy and for more neighbors to arrive with their phones recording. When I finally appeared, I was wearing pajamas and my best confused expression. "Doreen," I said, looking around at the chaos, her soot-covered car, the black mess on my lawn, the crowd of neighbors filming everything. "What was happened? Are you okay?" The look she gave me could have melted steel. Her face was streaked with soot, her hair was a disaster, and she was shaking with rage and adrenaline. "You tried to murder me," she screamed. "You booby-trapped your mailbox. That's illegal. I'm calling the police. I'm calling the fire department. I'm calling everyone." But what happened next made this story legendary. The police arrived exactly 14 minutes after Mrs. Patterson called 911, which meant Doreen had 14 minutes to rant and rave in front of a growing audience of neighbors with cameras. By the time Officer Johnson pulled up in his patrol car, there were at least 20 people gathered on the street, most of them filming, and Doreen looked like she'd been dipped in soot and left to dry. "Ma'am," Officer Johnson said, approaching Doreen with the careful expression of someone who'd dealt with hysterical people before, "I need you to calm down and tell me what happened here." Doreen pointed dramatically at my mailbox area, where small wisps of harmless smoke were still rising from where the gas had burned off. "This maniac booby-trapped his mailbox. He tried to murder me. Look at my car. Look at me." She gestured wildly at her soot-covered Honda and her disheveled appearance. Officer Johnson looked around at the scene, the destroyed mailbox, the burn marks on the ground, the crowd of witnesses, and I could see him trying to piece together what had happened. "Sir," he said, turning to me, "do you have any idea what occurred here?" I maintained my innocent expression perfectly. "I was asleep until I heard screaming and that awful noise. When I came outside, I found Doreen's car in my yard and my mailbox destroyed again." "Again?" Officer Johnson's eyebrows went up. "This has happened before?" That's when Bob stepped forward, bless his timing. "Officer, I've got the whole thing on video. Would you like to see it?" He held up his phone, and suddenly everyone was crowding around to watch the footage. The video was perfect. Clear shot of Doreen backing up to get a running start, the deliberate acceleration toward my mailbox, the impact, and then the spectacular results of our defense system. But the real game changer was what the video showed happening before the fireworks started. Doreen hadn't just bumped into my mailbox by accident. She deliberately rammed it with her car, clearly intending to destroy it. The video evidence was so obvious that even Officer Johnson couldn't pretend this was just a neighborly misunderstanding. "Ma'am," he said to Doreen, "it appears you intentionally drove your vehicle into Mr. Martinez's mailbox. That's destruction of property." Doreen's face went through about 17 different colors, none of them flattering. "He booby-trapped it. It's illegal to booby-trap your property. He could have killed me." Officer Johnson examined the mailbox area more carefully, looking at the small gas canister that Bob had designed to be completely obvious once someone knew where to look. "Sir, can you explain this device?" Bob handled the explanation perfectly. "It's a wildlife deterrent system," he said with complete sincerity. "We've been having problems with javelinas getting into garbage cans, so David asked me to help him set up something to scare them away. The flame is just camping gas, completely harmless, and it's only triggered by a significant impact, like, say, a large animal or a car." He pulled out his phone and showed Officer Johnson several legitimate websites that sold similar systems for protecting property from wildlife. When Officer Johnson noticed the deflated tires and asked about the spikes, Bob had a ready explanation. "Vehicle access control," he said simply. "Same type farmers use to keep trucks out of sensitive crop areas. They're only placed on David's property, and they're clearly marked in our property survey." He showed the officer his phone with photos of similar systems sold at agricultural supply stores. "Completely legal for property protection?" The loud alarm, Bob explained, was standard for wildlife deterrent systems. Everything we'd used was completely legal, commercially available, and designed for property protection. The fact that Doreen had triggered it by ramming her car into my mailbox was entirely her own doing. But the story got even better when the videos started spreading online. Mrs. Patterson had been live streaming to her social media account, and the footage of Doreen's spectacular meltdown had already been shared hundreds of times. Someone had edited together a highlight reel set to dramatic music, complete with slow-motion replays of the flame explosion. Another neighbor had uploaded cell phone footage from a different angle, showing Doreen's complete panic and her wild escape attempt across my lawn. By morning, the local news had picked up the story, and Doreen Cartwright had become the neighborhood's most famous resident, for all the wrong reasons. The video compilation had thousands of views and hundreds of comments, most of them pointing out that she'd clearly destroyed the mailbox intentionally and gotten exactly what she deserved. Several people shared their own stories about Doreen's harassment in the comments, creating a public record of her behavior that she couldn't deny or suppress. The legal consequences came quickly. Based on the video evidence, Doreen was charged with criminal destruction of property and had to pay a fine of $3,000 plus full restitution for my mailbox and lawn repair. But the social consequences were even more devastating. The HOA held an emergency meeting 3 days later, and Doreen was voted out as president by a margin of 47-3. Susan Parker was elected as the new president, and one of her first acts was to audit the HOA's finances. The audit revealed exactly what Susan had suspected. Doreen had been using community funds for personal expenses, including the repairs to her own house that she'd disguised as community improvements. The total amount was over $23,000, money that belonged to every homeowner in the neighborhood. Criminal charges were filed for embezzlement, and Doreen was banned from serving in any HOA capacity for 5 years. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was the complete social isolation that followed. Every time Doreen left her house, neighbors would point and whisper. Some would even wave their phones at her, pretending to record. The local grocery store cashiers recognized her from the viral video. Even the mailman started delivering her mail with a smirk. Within 2 months, Doreen had sold her house and moved away, unable to handle the constant embarrassment of being recognized as the woman who'd been defeated by a mailbox. The day the moving truck left, several neighbors actually cheered. The new family who bought her house turned out to be wonderful people who baked cookies for the whole street and never once complained about anyone's mailbox. I still live in the same house with a perfectly normal mailbox that's never been attacked since. The neighborhood is peaceful again, the HOA operates transparently under Susan's leadership, and property values have actually gone up now that people aren't afraid of random harassment. Sometimes the best defense really is a good offense, and sometimes you just need a little fire to light the way to justice. Want more crazy neighbor stories? Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments what would you have done in my situation.
QA stories where reality feels like fiction and fiction wishes it was this juicy. Hit that like before the next bombshell drops.